Elon Musk sat alone in the penthouse of one of his many luxurious properties, staring out the window at the sprawling city below. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the skyline. But inside, the glow was fading. His phone sat on the table, untouched, as he leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. For the world, Elon Musk was everything they admired, the visionary who had revolutionized space travel, electric cars, and artificial intelligence. He was the genius with an ever-expanding empire, someone who could seemingly do it all. But as the day slipped into night, one truth gnawed at him: he had achieved all of this and more, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of profound loneliness. It was a strange thing to feel, considering he had millions of followers, billions in the bank, and people constantly trying to get a piece of him. Yet, despite all the wealth and success, there was no one around him who truly understood the pressure, the isolation, the weight of his own expectations. The people who once shared his vision were now distant, and those who had been close to him, family, friends, were more like ghosts, mere shadows of relationships that once meant something. Elon had always been driven. His mind raced with ideas, plans, and strategies that could change the world. But tonight, none of those things seemed to matter. It had been a long time since he had shared a genuine moment of joy with someone who truly understood him. No business partner. No colleague. Not even the people closest to him, like his family. It was a sinking feeling, one he couldn't shake off, no matter how much he achieved. He ran a hand through his hair and glanced at the time. It was late, too late for a conference call, too late for any work that might distract him. The events of the day had been a blur, filled with numbers and spreadsheets, but none of it could fill the emptiness he felt. He thought about how, just a few years ago, he would have been sharing a drink with someone, laughing about the chaos of the day. Now, the laughter seemed like a distant memory. "What's wrong with me?" Elon asked himself. "Why does it feel like I'm losing everything, even though I'm gaining more every day?" His phone buzzed on the table, and for a split second, Elon thought about ignoring it. But then, he picked it up and saw a text from Grimes, his ex-partner. "Are you okay?" He sighed. The relationship had been a roller coaster, one filled with passion and chaos, but ultimately, they had drifted apart. He didn't even know what "okay" meant anymore. He typed back quickly, "Yeah, just busy." He set the phone down and closed his eyes, his mind swirling with questions. What had he really built over the years? A reputation? A fortune? Or had he built something far less tangible, a fortress around himself that kept people at arm's length? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The thought echoed in his mind. It wasn't a random thought. It was something he had often said during his online interviews and live streams. The public persona, the one they all loved, the one that was always on display, was not the real Elon Musk. But how much of the real Elon was left? The loneliness crept in deeper as he thought about the people who had once been a part of his life, his friends from childhood, his early colleagues. He had built this empire, but in the process, had he also built a wall around himself? How had he allowed this to happen? This story might just spark a new beginning, Elon thought to himself. Maybe he could change. Maybe it wasn't too late to rebuild what he had lost. But how? And what would that even look like? He turned to his computer and typed, "Why does aging without friends make you insecure?" It was a thought that had crossed his mind more times than he cared to admit. Loneliness had always been a companion in his life, but recently, it had become more pronounced, more obvious. The older he got, the more he realized how much he needed people, even though he was constantly surrounded by them. Friends were important, real, genuine friends, and that realization was both liberating and terrifying. "Isn't this supposed to be the time of my life?" he muttered to himself. He had everything, except, perhaps, the one thing that really mattered: connection. True friendship, the kind that weathered all storms, that went beyond the surface of business deals and technology. It wasn't until now, as he sat alone in the vast expanse of his home, that the truth hit him: success without companionship felt hollow. And aging without friends? It felt like he was losing something far more important than any business deal or technological breakthrough. There was a strange comfort in that thought. Maybe it wasn't too late to change things. Maybe he could stop this cycle of isolation and rebuild the connections that had been lost. After all, if there was one thing Elon Musk knew, it was that nothing was impossible, not even personal transformation. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He asked himself. For years, it had been the pursuit of success, of changing the world. But now, he realized that what really mattered was something else, the people who stood beside you, the friendships that helped you navigate the ups and downs. With a deep breath, Elon closed his laptop and picked up the phone again. This time, he sent a different message. It wasn't to a business partner or an investor. It was to an old friend, a friend he hadn't spoken to in years. He hesitated before pressing send, but then he did. Maybe this was the first step. Maybe this was the new beginning he had been waiting for. As he stared at the screen, he felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A small moment of connection in a world that often felt far too disconnected. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to change everything. The story, his story, might just be beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk's childhood was a far cry from the high-tech empire he would later build. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, on June 28, 1971, Elon grew up in a world that was far less glamorous than the one he would come to know. His father, Elon Musk, was an electromechanical engineer, and his mother, May, was a dietitian and model. Despite the seemingly successful family dynamic, the Musk household was marked by tension, emotional distance, and uncertainty. From an early age, Elon was deeply immersed in his own world of books, imagination, and technology. He was a curious child, often lost in the pages of science fiction novels, exploring the possibilities of space, technology, and the future. But this intellectual passion didn't translate into a sense of belonging. His relationship with his father was strained and distant, to say the least. Elon Musk was a strict, often cold man, and their relationship was characterized by conflict. Elon would later describe his father as emotionally abusive, a man whose coldness and critical nature shaped much of his early experience. Elon's mother, though loving, was frequently overwhelmed by the demands of raising her children in a turbulent home. She worked long hours as a dietitian and model, but still found time to nurture Elon's budding interest in computers and technology. It was from her that he inherited his determination and resilience. Despite the tension in the home, May remained a stable presence in Elon's life, encouraging him to explore his interests, even when it meant pushing back against the conventional expectations of success. As a young boy, Elon was an outsider. He wasn't interested in sports, like many of the other kids in his school. Instead, he spent hours reading books about science and engineering, teaching himself to code at an early age. This solitary nature of his childhood made him an easy target for bullies. At the age of 10, Elon was tormented by classmates who found amusement in making fun of his awkwardness. He recalled an incident where he was physically assaulted by a group of older boys, who threw him down a staircase. The experience left him with a deep sense of isolation and a burning desire to prove himself. At age 12, Elon's life took a pivotal turn when he sold his first computer program, a simple game called Blaster, for about $500. This small victory ignited a fire in him. It was the first taste of success and recognition he would have in a world that had so often made him feel small and insignificant. But while Blaster was a success, it didn't solve the deeper, underlying issues Elon faced. The trauma of his childhood, especially the lack of emotional support from his father, lingered in the background. In his late teens, Elon moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, leaving behind a home that had become increasingly unlivable. He sought distance from his father, who had become a source of bitterness in his life. Canada was a step toward freedom, a place where he could reinvent himself. It was also where he began to realize the scale of his ambitions. He wasn't just interested in making money or achieving personal success. He wanted to change the world. He wanted to shape the future. During his time at Queen's, Elon quickly demonstrated his sharp intellect and drive, but the emotional scars of his early life still influenced him. He was no longer the awkward teenager who had been bullied, but his mistrust of people and his obsession with perfection were traits that would follow him throughout his adult life. He eventually transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, where he earned degrees in both economics and physics. Yet, even at this prestigious university, Elon continued to keep people at arm's length. His laser-like focus on his studies and his entrepreneurial ideas left little room for friendships or emotional connection. Elon's early adulthood was marked by a singular drive. He was determined to leave his mark on the world, and he didn't have time for distractions. His first major business venture, Zip2, was the result of this obsession. A software company designed to help newspapers create online city guides, Zip2 was Elon's ticket into the world of Silicon Valley. By 1999, when Compaq bought Zip2 for nearly $300 million, Elon was already on his way to becoming one of the youngest tech millionaires in history. But the success didn't come without its costs. In the wake of his newfound wealth, Elon's relationships remained strained. He moved to California to start a new chapter, first with X.com, which would later become PayPal, and then to Tesla, SpaceX, and beyond. His ability to build companies was unrivaled, but his ability to nurture relationships was far less developed. The emotional isolation he had felt as a child persisted into his adult life, where the pursuit of success often took precedence over personal connections. Throughout the years, his relationships with those closest to him had suffered. His marriage to Justine Musk, which began in 2000 and ended in divorce in 2008, had been full of tension and miscommunication. They had 5 children together, but the strain of his workaholic nature and emotional distance ultimately caused their relationship to collapse. Elon's second marriage to actress Tallulah Riley in 2010 seemed to be another attempt to find emotional fulfillment, but that too ended in divorce in 2016. Through both marriages, Elon's obsession with his work and his inability to open up emotionally had left a trail of wrecked relationships in his wake. The loneliness, which had always been a part of his life, began to surface more frequently. He may have been surrounded by people, employees, investors, business partners, but the deeper connections he longed for were missing. The fame and fortune that many would envy only seemed to heighten his sense of isolation. As his ventures grew larger, so did the pressures that came with them. And despite his outward success, the internal struggle never ceased. Musk may have been building rockets to reach Mars, but he felt as though he was drifting farther away from the people who mattered most on Earth. It was in the midst of this turbulent personal life that Elon began to realize the extent to which loneliness had shaped his identity. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a fundamental part of who he had become. His drive for success had served as a shield, protecting him from the vulnerability of connecting with others. But now, as he aged and looked around at the life he had built, he couldn't ignore the void that remained. Looking back, Elon knew that his relationships, or lack thereof, had played a huge role in shaping who he was. The emotional scars from his early years, his broken marriages, and the loneliness that had accompanied his rise to fame had all contributed to the person he had become. But what he didn't know yet was that this realization would be the first step toward a new chapter in his life, one where connection, not just success, would become the true measure of his worth. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was the truth. And as Elon Musk sat in his penthouse that night, reflecting on his journey, he couldn't help but wonder if it was too late to change. Could a man who had spent his entire life chasing greatness finally learn to embrace the things that truly mattered, love, friendship, and human connection? That question, more than anything else, would haunt him in the days to come. The morning after that quiet, introspective evening, Elon awoke to the buzz of his phone. Despite the fact that he had barely slept, the messages piled in, a mix of emails, notifications from his various companies, and alerts about new developments in his ventures. For a moment, it seemed as though everything outside the walls of his mind was still functioning as it always had, relentlessly moving forward, growing, and evolving. But inside, things felt different. He had spent the previous night grappling with his loneliness, but now, as the whirlwind of his day-to-day routine swept him back into the grind of work, that inner turmoil began to stir once more. Was it possible to keep building this empire while also building the relationships he had long neglected? Or had he become too far removed from the human connections that should have been central to his life? The first meeting of the day was scheduled with SpaceX engineers about the Mars colonization plans. Elon quickly slipped into his business mode, his mind whirring with the technical details, the grand vision of space travel, the way everything could fall into place. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as they discussed the next steps for the Starship missions, an ambitious plan to send humans to Mars. SpaceX was his passion project, the culmination of his dreams. But, as the engineers threw out numbers and technical jargon, he felt an increasing sense of discomfort. They were talking about reaching the stars, but in the back of his mind, he could not shake the feeling that he was neglecting something much closer to home. The discussion ended with a set of new milestones, but as soon as the meeting was over, Elon felt himself retreating. The emptiness lingered in the pit of his stomach as he sat in his office, staring out at the vast landscape below. Even as his companies were pushing boundaries, his personal life felt more constrained than ever. The same feeling that had gnawed at him the night before was still present. It seemed as though no matter how many projects he took on, no matter how many billion-dollar deals he struck, he couldn't escape the loneliness that followed him. A ping from his phone broke his reverie. It was a message from Kimball, his brother. "Hey, I know you're busy, but we need to talk. It's been too long since we've had a real conversation. Let's catch up tonight." Elon stared at the screen for a few seconds, his thumb hovering over the reply button. Kimball had been one of the few constants in Elon's life, someone who had always stood by him through thick and thin. Despite their closeness, their conversations had become infrequent, limited to business or brief catch-ups when time allowed. Elon hadn't made much of an effort to reach out. He thought about Kimball's message for a moment, before typing back quickly, "Sounds good. Let's do it." The exchange was brief, but something about it tugged at Elon. Here was a person who had known him for years, who shared a deep bond with him. But even with Kimball, their relationship was more about shared history than emotional connection. Elon realized that he had pushed his brother, and many others, to the periphery of his life, consumed by his work, his mission, and his own emotional walls. Later that evening, Elon found himself sitting across from Kimball in one of his favorite restaurants in Los Angeles. The ambient noise of clinking glasses and murmuring conversations seemed distant as the two brothers sat in a rare moment of calm. Kimball had been quiet for a moment, watching his older brother, as if waiting for him to speak first. "You've been off lately," Kimball said softly, breaking the silence. "What's going on, Elon? I know we don't talk much these days, but I can tell something's bothering you." Elon hesitated, his mind spinning with so many thoughts. For the first time in a long time, he realized that Kimball could see through the polished facade. The walls he had built around himself seemed to be slipping, and for once, he wasn't sure if he was ready to let someone in. "I don't know," Elon replied, the words coming out heavier than he expected. "It's just, everything's moving so fast. I keep pushing forward, but it feels like there's a part of me that's getting lost along the way. I'm building things, amazing things, but sometimes it just feels like I'm building them alone." Kimball studied his older brother for a moment, his face softening with concern. "Elon, you're not alone. But you've always been so focused on the bigger picture, on changing the world, that you've left the people who care about you in the dust. You're doing incredible things, but you can't keep running from your own life." Elon felt a pang of guilt. Kimball's words struck a chord. He had always been so obsessed with pushing boundaries, whether it was creating the next big thing or reaching Mars, that he had neglected the very relationships that had shaped him in the first place. Kimball was right. He was running from something, and he knew exactly what it was, the fear of being vulnerable, of truly letting people in. I don't know how to change it, Kimball, Elon admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I feel like I've spent my whole life focusing on the future, on the mission. But now, as I get older, I realize I've missed something. I've missed people. Connections. Kimball didn't respond immediately. He just sat there, watching his brother, the weight of the moment settling between them. The years of distance, of silence, suddenly felt like an obstacle that could no longer be ignored. You have to start somewhere, Kimball finally said. You can't keep doing everything alone. You've got to make time for the people who care about you. Elon nodded, feeling the truth of Kimball's words sink in. But the thought of vulnerability was a challenge he wasn't sure he was ready to face. There were parts of himself he had buried, parts of his past that he hadn't fully dealt with. The relationships he had lost, the mistakes he had made, the emotional scars he carried, they were all tangled up in his quest for success. As they finished their meal, Elon felt a heavy weight on his chest. He couldn't avoid the issue anymore. The rising conflict inside him was unavoidable. It wasn't just about business, rockets, or technology anymore. It was about the very thing he had been running from for so long, connection. But how could he rebuild the pieces of his life he had scattered in the pursuit of greatness? And more importantly, was it too late? The journey he was about to embark on would be more difficult than he had ever imagined. The path to healing, to reconnection, would require more than just success. It would require confronting the most difficult parts of himself, the parts he had hidden away for years. And that journey had only just begun. The week following his conversation with Kimball felt like an eternity. Elon couldn't shake the weight of their discussion. There was something about hearing his brother's candid words that shook him to his core. It wasn't just the guilt that lingered, it was the realization that the very thing he had been avoiding all these years was not a choice anymore. He could no longer just throw himself into his work and expect that everything else would fall into place. His life was at a tipping point, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. The relentless pace of work at Tesla and SpaceX didn't allow him to reflect as much as he'd like. But in the rare moments of solitude between meetings, he couldn't help but think about the words that had stuck with him, "You've been running from your own life." He didn't know where to start. The idea of trying to reconnect with old friends, mend relationships, or even get in touch with his family on a deeper level seemed daunting, almost impossible. The emotional distance he had created over the years was thick, and the thought of dismantling it felt like scaling an insurmountable mountain. And yet, deep inside, a quiet voice told him that the first step was long overdue. On a flight to Texas to oversee some new developments at SpaceX, Elon found himself reflecting on his past, especially his early childhood. He thought about how he had been consumed by the need for validation and success. He was a young boy who had lived in constant fear of failure, a boy who had been bullied and ignored, so he had buried himself in the only thing that made sense, technology. But somewhere along the way, the obsession with progress had overshadowed his need for human connection. What had once started as a drive to escape loneliness had morphed into something much more complicated. In his pursuit of greatness, Elon had lost sight of the simple, grounding things that made life worth living: relationships, friendship, and love. As the plane cut through the sky, Elon made a decision. He wasn't sure what it would look like, but he knew that he had to change. The next time he was back in Los Angeles, he would reach out. He would try to reconnect, not just with his brother, but with others who had been important to him. It was terrifying to even think about, but the thought of continuing down this path of isolation was even more unbearable. That evening, as he walked through the halls of SpaceX's headquarters in Texas, Elon received a call that distracted him from his thoughts. It was from one of his closest advisors, a longtime friend who had worked with him from the very beginning. "Elon, we've got a problem. There's been a setback with one of the launches. The engineers are trying to figure it out, but we're looking at a significant delay." The news hit hard, but it didn't surprise Elon. In his world, setbacks were as common as successes. Yet, there was something about this one that felt different. It was as if the universe was throwing him yet another challenge, testing him, not just on his business acumen, but on his ability to weather the emotional storms that came with it. The sense of isolation he had long ignored seemed to grow louder, its presence more palpable. "Okay, let's handle this," Elon said, his voice calm, despite the tension inside. "Get me the full details, and I'll be in touch with the team tomorrow morning." The call ended, but Elon's thoughts immediately turned inward. The way he handled this crisis would tell him something about himself, about how far he had come, and whether or not he had grown emotionally. In his early days, he would have buried himself in work and overlooked the emotional toll it took on him and those around him. But now, the weight of personal responsibility felt heavier than the weight of any rocket or business venture. In the days that followed, Elon threw himself into fixing the SpaceX problem. He was familiar with the process, solve the technical issues, innovate, push through. Yet, despite his success in handling the crisis, his internal journey had begun to take precedence. The lonely nights, the emotional walls, and the missed connections started to gnaw at him with greater urgency. He realized that no matter how much success he achieved, there was always something missing. A part of him wanted to believe that he could keep going, just focusing on his work, blocking out the pain. But another part of him, one he had long ignored, was demanding more. It was the part that craved real human connection. The part that wanted to know that he was more than just his success, more than just the CEO of Tesla or the founder of SpaceX. He wanted to feel seen, heard, and understood. That desire grew stronger with each passing day. Elon knew it wasn't just about reaching Mars or revolutionizing the car industry anymore. It was about something much more profound. It was about finally acknowledging the personal side of his journey. The side that longed for companionship, for deeper connections with others. The side he had buried for years, afraid to show vulnerability, afraid that it would weaken his image as a visionary entrepreneur. On the day of the SpaceX crisis meeting, Elon made a decision. As he stood before his team, listening to the technical explanations and the potential solutions, he did something he hadn't done in years. He opened up. "Listen," he said, his voice a little less authoritative than usual, but more honest. "We've got work to do. But I'm feeling the weight of everything, business, the setbacks, the constant pressure. Sometimes it feels like I'm carrying the burden alone. I know you all have my back, but I need you to know that it's not just about rockets or cars for me anymore. I want to get this right for all of us." The room fell silent. Elon wasn't one to show cracks in his armor. But in that moment, he felt a shift. For the first time, he was allowing himself to be vulnerable, letting his team see the human side of him that had been hidden for so long. It was a risky move, but it was one he was ready to make. To his surprise, the room responded with a warmth that had been absent in the past. There were nods of agreement, and a few people spoke up with their own thoughts on how to proceed. The dynamic had shifted. It wasn't just about the technical aspects anymore, it was about trust, collaboration, and support. After the meeting, as he sat in his office, Elon realized something profound. His desire to be vulnerable, to connect with those around him, had given him a sense of relief. It was the beginning of something new. The work wasn't just a way to escape the pain of loneliness, it was a way to bring people together, to create something bigger than himself. The journey was far from over. There would be more setbacks, more challenges, more moments of doubt. But for the first time in years, Elon Musk felt like he was on the right path, not just to the stars, but to something far more meaningful: connection, trust, and a deeper understanding of himself and the people around him. And that journey, unlike any other, was the one that would truly transform him. Elon had always been able to push through obstacles. Whether it was overcoming a failure, bouncing back from a setback, or achieving the impossible, he had made it through because of one constant: his relentless focus on the future. For years, he believed that if he could just push hard enough, if he could just work long enough, everything would eventually fall into place. His companies would succeed, his ideas would revolutionize industries, and the pain of his personal life would fade into the background. But now, as he sat in his quiet office at SpaceX, looking out over the runway where rockets occasionally soared into the sky, Elon realized that the future wasn't the answer. It never had been. No matter how many projects he completed or how many awards he won, the emptiness within him had only grown stronger. He had spent a lifetime building rockets, cars, and businesses, but he had neglected to build the emotional foundation that he had needed all along. Success had been his armor, his shield against vulnerability. But no amount of success could cover up the growing cracks in his own heart. A series of events had led to this moment. A massive new milestone for Tesla was looming, one that would require his attention more than ever. SpaceX was preparing for another major launch, with the eyes of the world on them. Yet, even as his companies approached their most ambitious goals, the weight of isolation weighed more heavily on him. The breakthroughs that brought the world closer to Mars didn't seem to hold the same satisfaction anymore. Elon felt his phone buzz again. A text from Kimball. "Hey, how are you? I've been thinking about our talk. Let's grab lunch next week. I think there's more we need to talk about." Elon sat still for a moment, his fingers hovering over the screen. The words felt like an invitation. An invitation to dive deeper, to confront the very thing he had been running from. For so long, he had avoided confronting his feelings about family, about connection, about being truly seen. Kimball had sensed something before Elon had even fully understood it himself. The thought of talking more deeply, of confronting the discomfort that lay beneath the surface, made Elon's chest tighten. It felt like a tidal wave was looming just ahead. He had made progress. He had opened up to his team, admitted vulnerability in that meeting. But this was different. This was about confronting the emotional truth of his own life, the relationships he had neglected, the people he had pushed away. In the past, when Elon faced difficult challenges, he relied on logic and strategy. He could problem-solve his way out of any technical issue, any business concern. But this was not a problem to be solved with engineering. This was a matter of the heart, and that was something he couldn't fix with equations and innovation. He sat back in his chair, a sense of unease settling over him. Elon had always been a man of action, but right now, he didn't know what action to take. He could no longer ignore the fact that no matter how many rockets he launched, no matter how many people he helped through his innovations, he was still wrestling with the emptiness inside. The sense of loneliness wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was a crisis of self. At that moment, he realized the truth that he had been trying to avoid: the key to his emotional well-being wasn't in his companies or his futuristic plans. It wasn't in Mars or electric cars. It wasn't even in his billion-dollar achievements. It was in the relationships he had kept at arm's length. The trust, the connection, the raw vulnerability that came with being fully human. He needed more than just the surface-level accomplishments. He needed real, honest, deep connections. And he wasn't sure how to begin that journey. It terrified him. It made him feel small. But as much as he wanted to run away from it, he knew that confronting his loneliness was the only way forward. The days after the text from Kimball were filled with a sense of anticipation mixed with dread. Elon found himself fluctuating between the deep emotional highs of recognizing this need for connection and the overwhelming fear of what it might mean to truly open up. He felt himself coming undone, but at the same time, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had already shifted within him. Kimball had always been there for him, yet the relationship had been more about shared experiences and business talk than about exploring the emotional currents that had quietly shaped them both. Kimball had sensed Elon's isolation before Elon could even admit it to himself. That was the moment, the pivot, where things began to unravel for Elon, and the journey toward healing began. He didn't know if he was ready to confront everything, but he knew he had to try. The emotional crisis he was experiencing wasn't just a phase, it was a call to change, to grow, to become the person he had long neglected. The person who could embrace not just his successes but also his vulnerabilities. The person who could not only dream big but also love deeply, connect fully, and accept himself completely. That night, as Elon sat on his balcony, watching the stars shimmer in the distance, a thought occurred to him: maybe, just maybe, his greatest project wasn't SpaceX or Tesla, or even the journey to Mars. Perhaps his greatest challenge was learning to navigate the most complicated, unpredictable thing of all, human connection. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments of fear. There would be times when he would question whether he could truly change. But for the first time in years, Elon Musk wasn't running away from the pain of loneliness. He was running toward it, ready to confront it head-on, to find meaning in the relationships he had long neglected. It wasn't the launch of a new rocket or a new technology that would define his future. It was the connections he would make, the emotional truths he would uncover, and the way he would grow as a person. And that, he realized, was the most important journey he could ever embark on. As he looked out at the vast sky above, Elon felt something stir within him, an unfamiliar sense of hope. For the first time in a long while, he felt like the future wasn't just about reaching Mars. It was about finally reaching himself. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Elon's thoughts constantly circled back to the conversation he'd had with Kimball, and his own realizations about how isolated he had become. The emotional landscape of his life had been so neglected for so long that the very act of trying to connect felt overwhelming. It wasn't just about fixing relationships, it was about confronting something deeper, a personal reckoning. The business successes, the innovation, the fame, none of it had filled the void. It had been a kind of distraction, a mechanism that kept the pain at bay, but now, as the distractions faded, the reality stood naked before him. He wasn't used to feeling vulnerable. That was a part of his psyche he had buried long ago, preferring the security of work and progress to the risk of emotional openness. But this time was different. He could no longer ignore the emotional distance he had created, nor could he continue to lie to himself about the need for real, meaningful connections. As he prepared for the upcoming lunch with Kimball, Elon found himself grappling with a mixture of excitement and dread. Would it be as awkward as he feared? Could he really open up to his brother, or was the past too fractured to fix? For years, they had been business partners, supporting each other in the creation of their massive ventures. Yet, their personal relationship had always remained secondary, often non-existent. Their talks were mostly about the companies, the future, the next big idea. But the last conversation had been different. Kimball had shown an emotional side that Elon had rarely seen, and now, Elon had to do the same. The day of the lunch arrived, and Elon found himself driving to a restaurant he'd visited years ago with his family, an understated place with a warm, welcoming atmosphere. He parked, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. As he walked to the entrance, he could feel his heart racing, a reminder of just how unfamiliar and intimidating this emotional work was. Inside, Kimball was already waiting. As Elon approached, his brother looked up with a warm smile, something Elon hadn't seen in years. The smile wasn't just polite, it was genuine. It carried a sense of understanding, as if Kimball had known that this moment was coming. The weight of the conversation that lay ahead wasn't lost on either of them. "Hey, big brother," Kimball said, standing up to give him a hug. The embrace was brief, but it felt real, a sign that things were shifting. "Hey," Elon replied, sitting down across from him. They stared at each other for a moment, the silence between them stretching longer than usual. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was more like an unspoken acknowledgement of everything that had happened, both the shared history and the distance they had allowed to grow between them. Kimball was the first to break the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other night. I know it's hard, Elon. I know how much you've given to SpaceX, to Tesla, to all of it. But you can't do this alone. No one can." Elon looked at his brother, unsure of how to respond. The words felt true, yet he wasn't ready to fully admit to himself just how much he had been avoiding. He had always prided himself on his ability to push forward, to carry the weight of everything on his shoulders. To say that he needed help, that he was vulnerable, well, that wasn't something Elon Musk was used to acknowledging. "You're right," Elon finally said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "I've spent so much time running from things, thinking that if I just work harder, everything will work itself out. But it hasn't. And I've let things slide, relationships, friendships. Hell, even my own mental health. Kimball's expression softened, and he reached across the table to place a hand on Elon's. It was an incredibly simple gesture, yet one that carried more weight than anything Elon could have imagined. I've been there, too, you know. Just because we've built these incredible companies doesn't mean we're immune to the challenges of life. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to be scared. You don't have to carry the whole world on your own. Elon let the words sink in. For so long, he had seen himself as the man who had to fix everything, the visionary who had the answers. But the truth was, he was only human. He had his own fears, his own vulnerabilities. He wasn't invincible. And perhaps the most important lesson was that it was okay to admit that, to not be afraid of the cracks in his armor. Thanks, Kimball, Elon said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. I've been scared to face this, scared to confront the reality that I'm not invincible. But I guess I can't keep running. Kimball nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. It's a hard thing to accept. But I'm proud of you for recognizing it. We're here for you. You don't have to do this alone anymore. You have people who care about you, who want to see you succeed, not just in business, but in life. Elon felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but he knew the hard work had only just begun. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. It wasn't about having a single conversation or taking a break from work. It was about real change, a shift in perspective, in how he valued his emotional well-being and his connections with others. The lunch continued, but the conversation was no longer about business or rockets. It was about their childhood, their parents, the moments they had missed in each other's lives. It felt like they were finally seeing each other in a new light, not just as businessmen, but as brothers who had experienced the same struggles, the same loneliness, and the same desire for meaning. By the time the meal ended, Elon felt a profound sense of relief. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope for his personal life. He knew he would have to work at it, just as he worked at everything else. But it was a journey worth taking. It was a journey that would redefine not just his relationships but also his understanding of success. As Elon left the restaurant, a part of him felt lighter. There were still challenges ahead, both in his personal life and in his professional endeavors. But for the first time, Elon felt that maybe, just maybe, he could navigate both with the help of those around him. He had faced the truth about his loneliness, and while the road ahead was uncertain, he felt ready to take the next step. As he looked up at the sky, he realized that the future, for the first time, didn't just belong to rockets and electric cars. It belonged to the relationships he would rebuild and the person he was becoming. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. Maybe, just maybe, the greatest innovation of all was the journey to reconnect, to truly live, not just to exist. And that journey had only just begun. Elon's newfound resolve didn't dissolve overnight. Even after that cathartic lunch with Kimball, the weight of loneliness didn't vanish. Instead, it lingered, quietly reminding him of the decades spent buried in work, the personal relationships that had become neglected collateral damage in his pursuit of progress. It wasn't just about his brother. He had distanced himself from many others over the years, from old friends, to colleagues, to the very idea of community. But, for the first time in years, he could see a path forward. The journey was long and uncertain, but it was a journey that he felt ready to embark on. The first step in this new chapter was acknowledging that there was no quick fix. He could no longer rely solely on his typical method of attacking problems with relentless focus and determination. This wasn't about engineering solutions or building rockets, this was about opening himself up emotionally, and that felt like a challenge greater than anything he had ever faced before. As the days went by, Elon found himself reflecting more on the interactions he had with those closest to him. He began reaching out more, something he hadn't done in years. He texted old friends, people he hadn't spoken to in a long time, just to check in. He called Kimball more often, not about business, but about life, about their family, their memories, their moments of joy and sorrow. It was awkward at first, fumbling for words and finding himself unsure of how to be vulnerable without sounding forced. But he persisted. One evening, after a long day of meetings and strategy sessions, he found himself sitting in the backyard of his house in California, staring up at the stars. It was quiet out there, a peaceful kind of quiet that he rarely allowed himself to experience. The noise of the world, the buzz of his companies, all seemed far away, and in that silence, he felt something stir within him, a sense of calm that had been foreign for so long. For once, he wasn't thinking about the next big breakthrough, the next major project. He wasn't envisioning how to bring humanity to Mars or save the planet through sustainable energy. For the first time in a long while, he was just being. And it was in that moment that he realized just how much he had been missing in his life. He thought about his own parents, how they had tried their best, but how their emotional distance had shaped him in ways he wasn't fully aware of until now. His father, in particular, had always been a distant figure, one who valued success but was emotionally unavailable. Perhaps that was why Elon had always driven himself so hard. He had wanted to prove something to that cold, distant image of his father. But now, looking at the stars, Elon understood that the need for validation wasn't just from others, it was a need he had been ignoring within himself for far too long. As the nights passed, Elon began to open up more, not just to his family but to himself. He spent time reflecting on his life, not through the lens of his accomplishments, but through the lens of his humanity. What was it that he really wanted? What kind of person did he want to be beyond the business mogul, the visionary, the CEO? And how could he begin to cultivate the kinds of relationships that would bring meaning into his life? It wasn't about turning back time or erasing the years he had spent building his empire at the cost of his emotional life. Instead, it was about moving forward with an awareness that he didn't have to do it all alone. There was strength in asking for help, in sharing vulnerability, and in allowing others to be part of the journey. This, he realized, was the true test of his emotional growth. But that wasn't to say it was easy. At times, Elon felt the familiar pangs of insecurity, thoughts that he was too late, that he had already lost too much ground in terms of relationships. He questioned whether it was even possible to rebuild trust with people he had pushed away for so long. Was it worth it? And would they even want to be a part of his life again? One evening, as he walked through the offices of Tesla, he ran into Laura, one of his longtime employees who had been with the company almost from the very beginning. Elon had always admired her work ethic, her ingenuity, and her commitment to the mission. But they had never been close personally. As they spoke for a few minutes, discussing the progress of one of the new projects, Elon felt a sudden, deep urge to ask her something different. "Laura," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I've been thinking about something lately. I realized I've spent so much time focusing on work, on the mission, that I've missed out on really connecting with people. I don't know if I've ever thanked you properly for everything you've done. I haven't been the easiest person to work with, and I just wanted to say I appreciate you." For a moment, there was silence. Laura looked at him, her expression a mix of surprise and warmth. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you, Elon. That means more than you know. We all have our moments of focus, sometimes it's hard to balance the work with everything else. But it's never too late to start being there for the people around you." Elon smiled. It was a small moment, but it was significant. It was the beginning of something he hadn't even fully understood until now, genuine, human connection. It wasn't about grand gestures or big declarations, it was about the quiet moments of honesty, of acknowledging the truth and taking responsibility for the relationships that mattered. After that conversation, Elon felt a shift within himself. Maybe it wasn't about having all the answers, or fixing everything overnight. Maybe it was about showing up, being present, and allowing others to be part of his journey. Whether it was Kimball, Laura, or someone else, he realized that true success wasn't just about what he achieved in the business world. It was about the people he chose to surround himself with, the bonds he nurtured, and the vulnerability he allowed himself to feel. The road ahead wasn't easy. There would be setbacks, and there would be moments of doubt. But for the first time in his life, Elon Musk felt that he wasn't walking it alone. And that made all the difference. The weeks that followed were an emotional roller coaster for Elon. He had started to engage more deeply with those around him, but the reality of reconciling his past isolation with his newfound need for connection was proving to be more complex than he had anticipated. There were moments when he felt the old patterns creeping back, moments when work, pressure, and responsibility seemed like the only things he knew how to navigate. But each time he caught himself slipping into that old, familiar rhythm, working 20-hour days, locking himself away from his emotions, focusing on the next big achievement, he reminded himself that he had to change. It wasn't just for the people in his life, it was for himself, too. He couldn't keep ignoring the part of him that had long been neglected. The part of him that needed human connection, that needed friendship, that needed to feel seen. One day, he found himself sitting alone in the conference room at SpaceX, staring out the large glass windows at the sprawling campus below. The view was breathtaking, just like everything he had built. The rockets, the cars, the plans for Mars, it was all so magnificent. And yet, there was something deeply unsettling about it all. The emptiness inside him was like a quiet hum, always present but never loud enough for him to fully confront. "Hey Elon, I know we've been talking about making more time for each other, but I think it's time we make it happen. How about a weekend getaway? Just us. Let's get away from all the noise and reconnect. What do you say?" Elon stared at the screen for a long time, the invitation lingering in his thoughts. A getaway, just the two of them. It seemed so simple, but it was exactly what he had been needing. The thought of spending time with Kimball, away from the chaos of work and responsibility, felt like a lifeline. He quickly typed a response. "That sounds exactly like what I need. Let's do it." "When?" Kimball's reply came almost immediately. "How about this weekend? I'll make the arrangements. I think this could be good for both of us." For the first time in a while, Elon felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The idea of spending time with his brother, focusing on their relationship rather than the businesses they ran, felt incredibly freeing. Maybe this was the beginning of something more meaningful, something that wasn't tied to success or achievements. Just a simple, human connection. When the weekend arrived, Elon found himself on a private jet with Kimball, flying to a small cabin in the mountains. The setting was serene, nothing like the high-pressure world they usually inhabited. The cabin was nestled in a secluded valley, surrounded by tall pine trees and a stream that gurgled quietly in the distance. The air was fresh, crisp, and free from the noise of the outside world. As they settled in, Elon couldn't help but notice how different it felt to be here, away from everything. The slow pace, the lack of urgency, the lack of expectations, it was all so unfamiliar. For the first time in ages, he felt himself begin to relax. The brothers spent the next 2 days hiking, talking, and reconnecting. They spoke about their childhood, the moments they had shared as kids, and the times they had supported each other during tough times, both in their personal lives and in the pursuit of their businesses. They laughed about old family stories, memories of their parents, and the strange sense of responsibility they both felt growing up. They spoke about their struggles, their fears, and their hopes for the future. It was during one of these conversations, sitting around a campfire as the evening air turned cool, that Kimball asked something that caught Elon off guard. "Elon," Kimball began, looking at his brother with a serious expression, "I've been thinking a lot about your loneliness. You've built so much, SpaceX, Tesla, the Boring Company, all of it. But all of that, what's it really for if you don't have people to share it with? I know you've been so focused on work, on the future. But are you really happy? Do you have the people around you that make you feel fulfilled, or do you just have people who are there for the ride?" Elon stared into the fire, the question hanging in the air. It wasn't a question he had allowed himself to think about, not in such stark terms. The answer wasn't easy. He had always believed that his work was the ultimate purpose, that the companies he built, the missions he created, were enough. But now, with Kimball's words echoing in his mind, he wasn't so sure. He had spent years thinking that success was the only thing that mattered. But now, sitting there with his brother, he realized that maybe success was only part of the equation. Maybe the connections he had with others, the relationships he nurtured, were just as important, if not more so. "I've been so focused on the work," Elon admitted quietly. "So focused on changing the world, on creating something bigger than myself, that I've lost sight of the things that matter most. I've pushed people away, even the people who care about me. And I've let my own loneliness become a part of me that I didn't want to face." Kimball nodded, as though he had been waiting for Elon to come to this realization. "It's never too late, you know. You can't undo the past, but you can shape your future. It's about finding balance, about understanding that your worth isn't tied to just the things you build or the titles you have. It's about who you are as a person, and who you choose to have around you." Elon looked at his brother, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. It wasn't easy to hear, but it was the truth. He had been avoiding it for so long. But now, in the quiet of the mountains, he was finally beginning to understand what really mattered. The weekend passed in a blur of fresh air, deep conversations, and moments of quiet reflection. By the time they returned to civilization, Elon felt like a different person. He wasn't fully healed, and he knew there was still a long road ahead of him. But he had taken the first steps in acknowledging his loneliness and in trying to rebuild the connections that truly mattered. As they boarded the jet to head back to their respective worlds, Kimball clapped him on the back. "You're on the right path, Elon. Don't forget that." Elon nodded, a sense of resolve settling deep within him. There was still much to do, but now he knew that he didn't have to do it alone. The future wasn't just about what he could accomplish, it was about who he could become, and who he could surround himself with on the journey. And for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The weeks following the trip to the mountains were transformative. Elon's world had always been defined by work, by progress, by the never-ending quest to push the boundaries of what was possible. But now, there was something else pulling at him, something beyond the companies, beyond the tech. There was a growing sense that perhaps real fulfillment lay in the relationships he had been neglecting for so long. He returned to his usual routine of early mornings, long hours, and high-stakes meetings, but something had shifted. He started approaching his work with a new mindset. Rather than burying himself in endless tasks and goals, he began carving out time for himself and for the people who mattered. He spent more time with Kimball, reconnecting on a deeper level, and even started reaching out to others in his life, those who had been there when he needed them most. One evening, after a particularly challenging day at Tesla, Elon found himself walking through the parking lot, heading to his car. As he made his way to the vehicle, he saw a familiar face approaching, a face he hadn't seen in years. It was Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX and someone who had been by his side since the early days of the company. They had worked together through countless challenges, but over the years, their relationship had become purely professional. There was a time when they had been close friends, sharing late-night conversations about their hopes for the future and the journey they were both on. But as Elon's obsession with work deepened, their personal connection faded. "Gwynne," Elon said, surprised to see her here at this hour. "I didn't expect to run into you." She smiled, her eyes warm but with a touch of seriousness behind them. "Elon, I've been thinking about you lately. About how much things have changed. How much you've changed." Elon paused, feeling the weight of her words. He wasn't sure how to respond. He had never been one to openly discuss his personal life with colleagues, but something about Gwynne's presence made him feel like he could be honest. "I know," he said finally. "I've been focused. Too focused. I lost track of everything else. And I think I've paid the price for it. I've alienated people. I've been so driven by work that I forgot about the relationships that actually matter." Gwynne nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting this moment. "Elon, we all know how much you care about what you're building here. We see the passion, the vision. But the people around you, they care about you too. Not just the visionary leader, but the person you are. I think you know that now. There was a long pause before Elon spoke again, his voice quieter this time. I don't know if I've ever really let anyone in. I've always kept people at arm's length. I've been afraid of what would happen if I actually let them get close. Gwyn's expression softened. It's hard to let people in, especially when you're someone who's constantly pushing the envelope. But the truth is, you're not invincible. You can't do it all by yourself. And that's okay. Elon nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. I'm starting to realize that. I've spent so much time thinking that I have to be the one to make everything happen. But the truth is, I need others. I need to open up. Gwyn gave him a gentle smile. It's a step in the right direction, Elon. It's never too late to rebuild those connections. After that conversation, something inside Elon shifted even further. He realized that the journey he had been on wasn't just about his companies or his vision for the future, it was about the people he would bring with him on that journey. For so long, he had been so wrapped up in achieving greatness that he had neglected the relationships that truly mattered. But now, he was starting to understand that true success wasn't measured by how much he accomplished, but by how he showed up for the people who were there for him along the way. A few days later, Elon found himself at another dinner, this time, with a group of friends and colleagues he hadn't seen in ages. It was a small, intimate gathering at a local restaurant, the kind of setting that didn't involve business talk or presentations. Just food, conversation, and the kind of camaraderie he had long since forgotten. As he looked around the table, he saw the familiar faces of people who had supported him in various ways over the years. There was J.B. Straubel, his co-founder at Tesla, who had been with him since the beginning. There was Steve Davis, an engineer at the Boring Company, someone who had worked alongside him for years but whom he hadn't really connected with on a personal level in a long time. And then there were a few others, people who had been part of his life, some for decades, and others for only a few years. The conversation flowed easily, with laughter and stories shared over glasses of wine. Elon found himself smiling more than he had in a long time. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deadlines or strategies or the next big project. He was just present, enjoying the company of those around him. At one point, as the conversation lulled, Steve looked at Elon and asked, "You seem different, man. More relaxed. What's going on?" Elon chuckled, feeling a bit sheepish. "I guess I'm just realizing that there's more to life than work. I've spent so much time building things, pushing forward, that I've neglected the people around me. I'm trying to change that." JB raised an eyebrow. "It's about time, man. You've been all about the mission, but remember, the mission doesn't mean much if you don't have the right people with you. And I think you're finally starting to see that." Elon nodded, his smile fading slightly as he thought about the years he had spent pushing people away. "I know. I've been focused on the wrong things. But I'm trying to fix that." As the night wore on, Elon felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was surrounded by the right people, the people who cared about him, not just for what he had achieved, but for who he was as a person. It wasn't perfect, and he still had a long way to go in rebuilding the relationships he had lost, but it was a start. He didn't know exactly what the future held. He didn't know if he would ever completely let go of the work that had defined him for so long. But for the first time, he was okay with that. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to keep moving forward, with the people who mattered by his side. And that, he realized, was enough. As time passed, Elon felt a subtle shift inside him. The changes he had been making were not easy, but they were necessary. He had always been someone who thrived on control, who measured success by the things he built and the projects he completed. But now, he was beginning to understand that true strength wasn't just about keeping everything in order. It wasn't just about having all the answers or being the one who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. True strength came from being vulnerable, from admitting when he didn't have it all together. In the days following the dinner with his friends and colleagues, Elon began to allow himself to feel more deeply. He started talking more openly about his struggles, his fears, and his insecurities. For years, he had buried those feelings beneath a layer of ambition and achievement, but now, for the first time in a long time, he was giving himself permission to be human. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when the old habits crept in, when he felt the need to retreat into his work or when he was tempted to bottle up his emotions. But he was trying. And that, in itself, was progress. One afternoon, he found himself sitting in the office of his therapist, Dr. Alexander, a man who had been guiding him through his journey of self-reflection and emotional growth. It had been a few months since their last session, and today, Elon was feeling particularly introspective. The weight of his internal conflict, between his ambition and his need for connection, was more present than ever. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Elon began, leaning back in the chair, his hands resting on the armrests. "I've been making some changes, trying to reconnect with the people in my life, trying to be more vulnerable. But it's not easy." Dr. Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Vulnerability is never easy, Elon. It requires trust, not just in others, but in yourself. It requires the courage to let go of the armor you've built over the years and face the world without it." Elon let out a sigh, rubbing his hand over his face. "I've always prided myself on being able to handle anything. I've built companies, changed industries, changed the world, even. But when it comes to relationships, when it comes to letting people in, it's like I've been avoiding it for so long that now it feels like I'm starting from scratch." "That's perfectly normal," Dr. Alexander replied. "You've spent so much of your life focused on your vision, on your work, that you've neglected the other aspects of your life. But now that you're trying to reconnect, it's not going to be instant. It's going to take time. And more importantly, it's going to require patience, with yourself, and with others." Elon nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his therapist's words. He knew he had a long way to go, but he also knew he couldn't continue pretending that everything was fine when he had been living in emotional isolation for so many years. "I feel like I've been living two lives," he admitted. "There's the person everyone sees, the leader, the innovator, the entrepreneur. And then there's the person inside who feels lost, who feels disconnected, who feels like he's never really been seen for who he truly is. I've been so caught up in the vision, in the future, that I've neglected the present. I've neglected the people who matter." "That's a big realization," Dr. Alexander said. "But it's a step in the right direction. The fact that you can acknowledge that, and that you're willing to work on it, is huge. It's not easy for someone like you to admit that you don't have all the answers. But that's part of the process of growth." Elon took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. He had always been driven by the idea that he had to be the one to have the answers, the one to solve the world's problems. But now, for the first time, he was allowing himself to accept that it was okay to not have everything figured out. It was okay to need help, to lean on others, to admit that he couldn't do it all alone. Later that evening, after his session with Dr. Alexander, Elon found himself standing in front of a mirror in his bathroom, staring at his reflection. It wasn't the first time he had looked at himself this way, but tonight, something felt different. He wasn't just seeing the face of the CEO or the entrepreneur. He was seeing the man who had spent so much time running away from his own vulnerability, the man who had buried his emotions in the name of progress and success. As he gazed at his reflection, he thought about the conversations he had been having lately, the conversations with Kimball, with Gwyn, with his friends, and with his therapist. Slowly but surely, he was learning how to open up, how to share the parts of himself he had long kept hidden. He was learning that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. He thought about the moments he had spent with his family, especially with his brother Kimball, and how those moments had felt like a lifeline. He thought about the people at Tesla and SpaceX, those who had been by his side for years, who had supported him through thick and thin. He realized that he wasn't alone, even when he had felt like it. There were people who cared about him, people who wanted to see him succeed not just as a leader, but as a person. As he stood there, staring into the mirror, Elon made a quiet promise to himself. He promised that he would continue to open up, continue to embrace vulnerability, continue to build the relationships that mattered most. He wasn't perfect, and he wasn't going to be able to fix everything overnight. But he was ready to try, and that was enough for now. For the first time in a long time, Elon Musk didn't just see the reflection of a man who had built empires. He saw the reflection of a man who was learning how to live, how to connect, how to love, and how to let others love him in return. And in that moment, standing in the quiet of his bathroom, Elon Musk understood something profoundly important: he didn't have to be invincible. He didn't have to do it all alone. And most importantly, he didn't have to have all the answers. For the first time, that felt like enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? In the weeks that followed, Elon's sense of vulnerability continued to grow, albeit at a slower pace. He was learning, bit by bit, how to balance the immense pressure of being a visionary with the quiet but essential task of being human. Yet, as he began to repair his relationships and nurture his emotional health, a new challenge arose, a challenge that made him question his entire journey, his purpose, and the very meaning of his legacy. It began with a conversation at a dinner party hosted by one of his old friends, a fellow Silicon Valley entrepreneur who had long admired Elon for his relentless drive and success. The night was filled with discussions about the future of technology, the exploration of space, and the ethics of artificial intelligence. But as the evening wore on, the conversation took a more personal turn. "I've always wondered, Elon," his friend asked casually, sipping a glass of wine, "what do you really want your legacy to be? What's the endgame for you?" Elon paused, the question hanging in the air. He had been asked about his legacy before, but this time felt different. It wasn't just a question about his companies or his ventures, it was a question about him as a person, about what he wanted to leave behind, not just as a titan of industry, but as someone who had touched the lives of others. For a long time, Elon had thought about his legacy in terms of his accomplishments. He saw himself as a person on a mission, a person who was going to change the world, not just through technology but by making a lasting impact on humanity. He had dreams of colonizing Mars, of advancing sustainable energy, of creating a future where humans could live beyond Earth. It was grand, it was audacious, and it consumed him. But now, as he sat at the table, surrounded by people who were all too familiar with the demands of ambition and success, Elon felt a sudden sense of uncertainty. Was his legacy really about what he built? Or was it something deeper, something more personal? "I don't know," he admitted after a long pause. "I used to think that my legacy was going to be about the things I created, the companies I built, the world I could change. But lately, I've been wondering if there's more to it than that. I don't want to be remembered just for the work. I want to be remembered for how I lived. I want to be remembered for the people I cared about, the relationships I nurtured." His friend raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the shift in Elon's tone. "That's a new answer. You've always been about the mission, the future. Are you saying you're starting to care more about the present?" Elon nodded, his gaze drifting to the window, where the soft glow of the city lights reflected off the glass. "I'm starting to realize that the future isn't just about what I leave behind in terms of inventions. It's about how I spend my time now, and who I spend it with. I've neglected so much of that in the past. I've been so focused on pushing the envelope that I've lost sight of what matters in the moment." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Elon couldn't shake the thoughts that lingered in his mind. The weight of his legacy, once something he could carry with ease, was now a burden he wasn't sure how to bear. As his thoughts turned inward, he reflected on the emotional toll of his journey, the years spent in isolation, the sacrifices he made, the relationships that had frayed under the strain of his obsession with progress. Days later, Elon found himself walking through the hallways of SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The facility was bustling with activity, engineers working on rocket designs, teams in meetings discussing future projects. He walked past them, observing the passion and dedication of the people who had been with him for years. There was something grounding about the energy in the air, a reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place. As he entered his office, he sat at his desk and pulled out a notebook, something he hadn't used in years. It was filled with scribbled ideas and half-formed thoughts, remnants of his early days as an entrepreneur when he would write down everything from potential business ventures to philosophical musings. Now, as he flipped through the pages, one particular entry caught his eye, a note he had written years ago when SpaceX was still in its infancy. What do I want the world to say about me when I'm gone? Do I want them to say I built a company? Or do I want them to say that I helped change the course of history, that I helped people live better lives, that I made a difference to those around me? Reading the words, Elon felt a pang of realization. Back then, he had been focused on his mission, on the legacy of his work. But now, he understood that it wasn't enough to just make history. The people he had encountered along the way, the ones who had stood by him, the ones he had loved and cared for, were the true measure of his impact. He set the notebook down and leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. What was he really building, after all? Was it just companies, technologies, and innovations? Or was he building something more, a future where his legacy would be defined not by his achievements, but by the relationships he had nurtured and the lives he had touched? That night, Elon found himself on the phone with Kimball, his brother, who had been his constant throughout the years. They had shared countless moments of triumph and struggle, but they had also been separated by their different paths, Elon's focus on the future, Kimball's commitment to building community. Elon, Kimball said, his voice calm but firm, I think you're realizing something important. All this time, you've been building the future, but the present is where the real meaning lies. It's in the moments we share with the people we love. It's in the relationships we build, the connections we make. Those are the things that truly define us. Elon let out a long breath, the weight of Kimball's words settling over him. I know, Kimball. I know. I've spent so long thinking that I had to do everything on my own. But now I'm starting to see that the real value isn't just in what I achieve. It's in the people who are part of this journey with me. Kimball's voice softened. It's never too late to shift your focus. I've always been here for you, Elon. And I know you'll find a way to balance the work you love with the relationships that matter. It's a hard thing to figure out, but you're already on the right path. The conversation ended, but the words lingered in Elon's mind. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of clarity about what his legacy would truly be. It wasn't just about changing the world with his innovations, it was about how he changed the lives of those who mattered to him. It was about the love he gave and received, the bonds he nurtured, and the people who walked alongside him through it all. Elon knew he still had a long way to go on his journey of self-discovery, but in this moment, he felt something he hadn't in a long time, peace. For the first time, his legacy felt not like a burden, but like a promise to live a life that mattered, not just for what he achieved, but for who he became along the way. As the months passed, Elon found himself caught between two worlds. On one hand, he was still consumed by his work, by his endless mission to reshape industries and change the course of humanity. On the other hand, the insights and lessons he had been learning about vulnerability, relationships, and the importance of human connection were slowly taking root in his mind. The tension between these two aspects of his life was beginning to weigh heavily on him. One particularly quiet evening, Elon found himself staring at his phone, a series of unread messages blinking back at him. His inbox was full of updates, requests, and reminders, all related to the many projects and ventures he was overseeing. But amidst the noise of his professional life, one message stood out, a text from his oldest friend, Steve. Elon, it's been a while since we've caught up. How are you, really? I know things have been crazy, but you've got to take some time for yourself. Let's meet up soon. We'll talk about everything, no tech talk. Just us. Let me know. Elon's thumb hovered over the screen as he read the message again. It had been a long time since he'd allowed himself the luxury of such a simple request. No agenda, no expectations, just a chance to reconnect with someone who had known him before the fame, before the billionaire status, before the endless whirlwind of work. Steve had been there through the ups and downs, the early days when they dreamed about starting companies, when the idea of SpaceX or Tesla was just a glimmer of possibility. The decision felt monumental. Elon had grown so accustomed to being on, always available, always moving forward, always working. To take a step back, to carve out time for a personal conversation, seemed almost like an act of rebellion against the demands of his life. But he knew, deep down, that it was necessary. He hit reply and typed a quick message. "Let's meet. I'll make time. It's been too long." A few days later, Elon met Steve at a small, quiet cafe tucked away in a corner of Los Angeles. The air was warm with the golden glow of late afternoon sunlight, and the sound of clinking cups and soft chatter filled the space. It was a far cry from the sterile, high-tech environment of his offices and factories, and for the first time in a while Elon felt a sense of peace settle in. Steve was already sitting at a table when Elon walked in, his familiar grin spreading across his face as soon as he saw him. There was something comforting about Steve's presence, something unassuming and grounded. No talk of rockets, no conversations about business, just a friendship that had stood the test of time. "Elon, it's good to see you," Steve said, standing up to give him a hug. "I'm glad you could make it." Elon smiled, shaking his friend's hand. "I'm glad you reached out. It's been too long. I've been a little caught up with things." Steve raised an eyebrow, his expression knowing. "I figured. You're always caught up. But how are you, really?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Elon found himself at a crossroads. He could fall back on the usual responses, the answers everyone expected, that he was doing fine, that things were busy, that he was always working toward the next big thing. But Steve wasn't asking for those answers. He was asking for the truth. Elon exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "I've been better. I've been struggling with balancing everything. The work, the family, the people in my life. It's like I'm trying to do it all, and I'm not sure where to focus anymore. I feel like I'm spread too thin." Steve nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. "You've always been the kind of guy who pushes himself to the limit, always thinking about the next big goal. But you're right. It's a lot to juggle. And I think it's starting to weigh on you." Elon felt a sense of relief at Steve's words. For the first time in ages, he felt like someone truly understood the tension he was carrying. "I don't know how to stop," Elon admitted, his voice quieter now. "I don't know how to take a step back. It feels like if I stop, everything will fall apart. But if I keep pushing this hard, I might just burn out." Steve leaned in, his voice steady and calm. "You know, Elon, I think you've always believed that your worth is tied to what you accomplish. You've built all these incredible things, changed entire industries, but you can't keep doing it alone. You're only human." Elon glanced down at the table, the weight of his friend's words sinking in. "I know," he muttered, "but I'm scared. I'm scared that if I let go, everything will collapse. That the people I care about will slip away because I wasn't there enough." Steve placed a hand on Elon's arm, his touch grounding him in the moment. "That's the thing, Elon. You've been so focused on holding everything together, on creating this image of invincibility, that you've neglected the most important part, the people who actually care about you. The ones who want to see you succeed, not just as a CEO, but as a person. Let them in. Let them help you. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders." Elon swallowed hard, a knot forming in his throat. For the first time, he truly understood what Steve was saying. His need for control, his relentless pursuit of perfection, had created an emotional distance between him and those he loved. In the name of progress, he had shut out the very people who could offer him the support he needed. "I've been so afraid," Elon confessed, his voice raw. "Afraid of letting down the people who depend on me. Afraid of being seen as weak or vulnerable. But I'm realizing now that maybe that's the real weakness. Trying to do it all alone. Steve smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. It's never weak to lean on others, Elon. It's actually the bravest thing you can do. Elon felt a wave of emotion wash over him. The truth had been there all along, but it had taken a long time for him to see it. He wasn't invincible. He didn't have to do it all alone. And for the first time, he was beginning to accept that. The conversation drifted to other topics as the evening wore on, but the words Steve had spoken lingered in Elon's mind. He had been so focused on changing the world that he had almost forgotten that the world he was trying to change was made up of people who mattered to him, people who could help him carry the weight of his vision. As they said their goodbyes and Elon headed back to his car, he felt a sense of clarity that had been missing for years. The journey ahead would still be challenging. He still had grand goals and ambitious dreams. But now, he knew that it wasn't about doing it all by himself. It was about finding strength in others, about allowing himself to be vulnerable and lean on the people who cared about him. For the first time in a long time, Elon Musk felt the weight of his own humanity. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. The days following his conversation with Steve were filled with a new sense of purpose. Elon had spent so many years chasing the future that he had nearly lost sight of the present, the relationships that anchored him, the people who made his journey worthwhile. Now, with that clarity in mind, he began to make small but deliberate changes. It wasn't easy. The pressures of his companies were always there, lurking, demanding his attention. But for the first time, Elon began to carve out time for the things that really mattered, his family, his friendships, and, most importantly, himself. He began with his family. For too long, he had been the absentee father, consumed by the demands of his empire. His children, he realized, had been growing up without him being fully present. It was a realization that stung deep in his heart. His mind raced as he considered the possibility that his children might one day look back and feel abandoned, that his legacy could be tainted by missed moments and unspoken words. The first step was reconnecting with his sons. He arranged a day to spend with them, a rare event in recent years. It wasn't about taking them to lavish events or showing them the fruits of his labor. No, this time, it was about being there in the simple moments. He picked them up from school, took them to their favorite park, and spent the afternoon playing catch, talking about their interests, and laughing about nothing in particular. For the first time in a long time, Elon realized that being a father wasn't about being a perfect provider, it was about being there, fully present, in the moments that mattered. That evening, as he tucked his sons into bed, one of them looked up at him and said, "Dad, I'm glad you're here. I miss when we used to do this more." Elon's heart sank. How many times had he missed these moments? How many birthdays, school plays, and everyday moments had he been too busy to be a part of? The guilt was overwhelming, but it was also a wake-up call. He couldn't afford to lose any more time. "Me too, buddy," Elon said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise I'll be here more. We'll do this more often." The next morning, he met with his ex-wife, Justine, to discuss a more balanced approach to co-parenting. They had their differences, but they both wanted the best for their children. They came to an agreement on how to spend more quality time with the boys, how to make sure Elon was truly present, not just physically, but emotionally. It wasn't easy, old wounds still lingered, but it was a step forward. While he was making strides with his family, Elon knew that his journey to reconnect with others had only just begun. He turned his attention to his closest friends, those who had been with him from the early days of his career, when he had little more than an idea and a dream. These people had supported him through thick and thin, had celebrated his victories and helped him through his failures. Yet, over the years, he had become so consumed with his work that many of these relationships had grown distant. One person he hadn't reached out to in far too long was his brother, Kimball. Kimball had always been there for him, a steady presence in his life, but as Elon's success grew, they began to drift apart. Kimball had his own path, building his own ventures and focusing on his passions, but that didn't mean Elon couldn't make an effort to reconnect. One afternoon, Elon called Kimball to invite him out to a casual dinner. There was no agenda, no talk of business, just a chance to reconnect as brothers. Kimball agreed, and they met at a small restaurant in Los Angeles. As they sat down, Elon looked across the table at his brother. Kimball hadn't changed much, still the same easygoing, grounded person who had always been there when Elon needed him. "I've been meaning to do this for a while," Elon began, stirring his drink absently. "I've been distracted lately. And I've neglected the people who matter most. You're one of them, Kimball. I know I haven't been around as much, and I'm sorry for that." Kimball leaned back in his chair, studying Elon's face for a moment. "Elon, I get it. You've had a lot on your plate. But I want you to know that you don't have to go through this alone. I'm still here, and I always will be." Elon let out a long breath, the weight on his shoulders easing slightly. "I guess I've always felt like I had to do everything on my own. Like I couldn't rely on anyone else. But I'm realizing that's not true. I've spent so much time building things, but I haven't spent enough time building the relationships that matter." Kimball nodded. "It's easy to get caught up in the mission. But the mission isn't just about what you create. It's about who you become along the way, and who you take with you. You've got a lot of people who care about you. Don't forget about them." Elon smiled softly. "I'm trying not to." The rest of the dinner was spent reminiscing about old times, sharing laughs, and simply enjoying each other's company. There was a familiarity in the air, a sense of comfort that only came with years of shared experiences. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt a sense of peace with his past. As the days turned into weeks, Elon continued to rebuild his relationships, slowly but surely. He learned how to balance his ambition with the need for connection. It wasn't an easy process, and there were moments when the weight of his responsibilities felt overwhelming. But with each step, he felt a little lighter, a little more grounded. One day, as he was walking through the Tesla factory, checking in on the latest developments, he caught a glimpse of a group of engineers working together, laughing as they collaborated on a new project. In that moment, Elon realized that the work itself, what he had spent years pouring his soul into, wasn't the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal was the people he worked with, the community they had built together. He walked over to the team and watched them for a moment, a quiet smile on his face. These were the people who had helped him make his dreams a reality. These were the ones who had stood by him through the trials and triumphs. He wasn't in this alone. He never had been. As he walked away, heading back to his office, he felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. His journey was far from over. The work was never done. But for the first time in a long time, he knew that he wasn't just building a future for himself. He was building a future for everyone around him. And that, he realized, was the true legacy he wanted to leave behind. Despite the progress Elon had made in his personal life, there was still a shadow that lingered over him, a sense of unease, a fear that something vital was still missing. The deep-rooted insecurity that had shaped his worldview for so long was hard to shake. No matter how many meaningful conversations he had, no matter how many relationships he had begun to heal, the fear of loneliness continued to gnaw at him. Elon had come to realize that loneliness wasn't just about being physically alone. It wasn't just about a lack of companionship or social interaction. It was a deeper, more insidious feeling, the sense that no matter how many people surrounded him, no one truly understood him. The weight of being misunderstood, of being alone in his thoughts and ambitions, was something that had plagued him for years. The drive for success, for the monumental achievements that would leave a mark on history, had come at the cost of personal connection. In private moments, when he allowed himself to pause and reflect, Elon often wondered if his success had actually isolated him more than it had elevated him. At first, the idea of being at the top of the tech world had seemed like the ultimate goal. But now, with every milestone passed, it began to feel like a gilded cage. The higher he climbed, the farther away the world of meaningful, unguarded human relationships seemed. It was during one of these reflective moments, after a long and grueling day at SpaceX, that he received another message from Steve, his old friend. It was simple, just a few words, but it came at exactly the right time. "Hey Elon, I'm worried about you. We need to talk." The words were sharp, and Elon felt a chill run down his spine as he read them. Steve had never been one to sugarcoat things, but this felt different, urgent. He immediately called his friend. "Hey, Steve. What's up?" Elon asked, trying to mask the unease in his voice. "I think you know exactly what's up," Steve replied. "You've been avoiding it, but you can't run forever. I've been hearing things, man. People are starting to notice the toll it's taking on you. You're spreading yourself too thin, and you're pushing everyone away, your team, your family, your friends." Elon's heart skipped a beat. He had been so focused on the external, on the work, on the results that he had ignored the fact that his efforts to maintain control had come at the expense of everything else. His thoughts began to spiral. Had he really become that person? The one who isolated himself, who was so consumed by the mission that he had forgotten how to truly live. "I know, Steve. I know. But what am I supposed to do?" Elon's voice cracked slightly, betraying the vulnerability he had been hiding. "Every time I try to slow down, it feels like everything will fall apart. I don't know how to stop. I've spent so long building something, and now it feels like if I take a step back, I'll lose everything I've worked for." Steve was silent for a moment, and then he spoke again, his tone softer, more understanding. "Elon, no one can build something great alone. You don't have to do it all by yourself. You've got to start trusting the people around you, your team, your family, your friends. You can't keep pushing them away. They want to help, but they can't if you don't let them in." Elon exhaled sharply, his mind racing. The words stung, but they also struck a chord. Deep down, he knew Steve was right. It wasn't just the weight of the world on his shoulders, it was his inability to share that weight, to trust others with the burden. His loneliness wasn't a result of not having people around him, it was a result of not letting those people in. "I'll try," Elon said quietly. "I'll try to do better. But it's hard." "I know it is," Steve replied, "but you're not alone in this. You don't have to do it alone." The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and conference calls. Despite his best efforts, Elon couldn't shake the conversation with Steve from his mind. He found himself questioning everything he had believed about himself, the image he had carefully constructed, the persona of the unstoppable, brilliant visionary who had built companies from the ground up. As much as he tried to push the thoughts away, the realization that he had been isolating himself continued to resurface. The loneliness that had haunted him for so long was not just a product of his busy schedule or his high expectations. It was a deeper emotional isolation that came from the fear of being vulnerable, of admitting that he, too, needed others to succeed, not just in business, but in life. That afternoon, after another marathon meeting at Tesla, Elon found himself walking alone through the sprawling campus of the company's headquarters. The sight of the gleaming cars and innovative technology all around him should have filled him with pride, but instead, it felt hollow. For a moment, he stopped and looked out over the rows of vehicles, the smooth lines and cutting-edge designs shimmering in the afternoon light. He thought about how much had been achieved, how far he had come, but he also thought about what he had sacrificed along the way. "Hey, Elon." He turned to see Kimball walking toward him, a warm smile on his face. For a moment, Elon felt a wave of relief, as though seeing his brother made everything feel a little more manageable. "Hey, Kimball," Elon said, trying to keep his voice steady. "How's everything going?" "Busy, as usual," Kimball replied, "but I wanted to check in with you. I know things have been crazy, but you've been off the radar lately. You okay?" Elon hesitated. For the first time in years, he realized that he wasn't just avoiding his feelings, he was avoiding the people who cared about him. He couldn't keep pushing them away, couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. "No, Kimball, Elon admitted, his voice softening. I'm not okay. I've been feeling disconnected. Like I'm doing all this work, but I'm losing touch with the people who really matter. And I don't know how to fix it. Kimball's expression softened with empathy. Elon, you don't have to fix everything on your own. We're all here for you. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Elon felt a lump form in his throat. He had been so focused on achieving greatness that he had forgotten that greatness wasn't just about building companies, it was about building connections, about being human. Thanks, Kimball, Elon said, his voice barely above a whisper. I needed to hear that. Kimball gave him a light pat on the shoulder. Anytime, man. Anytime. As they stood there, in the middle of the Tesla campus, something inside Elon shifted. He realized that the path forward wasn't just about scaling new heights or launching new projects. It was about reconnecting with the people who had always been there, the ones who believed in him not because of his success, but because of who he was. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt like he wasn't alone. And that, he realized, was the beginning of something new. Despite his newfound resolve to reconnect with those around him, Elon's mind continued to churn. The feelings of loneliness were still there, lurking just beneath the surface. He had made strides, sure, reconnecting with his family, spending more time with Kimball, and even seeking out honest conversations with friends. Yet, the pressure of being Elon Musk, the weight of his responsibilities, always found a way to creep back into his thoughts. Every time he tried to carve out a moment for himself, he was reminded of the ever-growing mountain of expectations that had been placed on his shoulders. The world didn't seem to care if he was tired, if he needed a break, or if he was struggling internally. To them, he was the guy who changed the world, who invented the electric car, the rocket, and more. But who was Elon Musk when he wasn't the face of Tesla or SpaceX? He didn't have the answers yet. But as he sat in his office, looking out over the horizon with a heavy heart, he couldn't help but ask himself, was it worth it? He had built an empire from nothing, transforming industries and redefining the future of space and transportation. But in doing so, had he sacrificed too much of himself along the way? Hey, Elon, a voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Gwynne Shotwell, president of SpaceX, standing in the doorway with a smile. Despite the stress and tension that had recently weighed on his shoulders, Gwynne had always been a calm presence, one of the few people who could speak to him directly without fear of causing friction. I didn't mean to interrupt, she continued, but we've got a problem with one of the launches. The engineers want your input. Elon blinked, the shift in his mind sharp and jarring. It was as if the very mention of work had pulled him back into the present. The world of rockets, propulsion, and the future of space exploration had always been his passion, but now it felt like a burden, an obligation rather than a dream. Right, let's take a look, Elon said, pushing his personal thoughts aside. He followed Gwynne out of his office, his mind slowly transitioning back into the mode he knew best, the relentless pursuit of perfection. The problem with the launch turned out to be a minor technical issue, a discrepancy in one of the fuel systems that could have led to a potential delay. Within an hour, it was solved, and the team was back on track. But as Elon walked back to his office, the victory felt empty. There had been no applause, no sense of accomplishment, just another problem solved, only for another one to appear in its place. Gwynne had given him a reassuring smile before she left, but Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Despite all the wins, despite all the progress, there was still an undeniable emptiness that lingered in his gut. That night, as he lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, he realized just how much of his identity had been tied to his work. His entire life had been about achieving monumental goals, building things that changed the course of human history. And yet, despite all of his successes, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had overlooked the importance of the more personal aspects of life. A few days later, after another grueling set of meetings, Elon sat down for lunch with a few key members of his team. They had recently finished a big presentation about the future of SpaceX's Mars program, and while the details were exciting, Elon couldn't help but feel detached from it all. As much as he loved space exploration, it had become a distant concept in his mind, a way to escape, rather than something to truly connect with. As he absent-mindedly chewed on his sandwich, one of the engineers, an up-and-coming young woman named Sarah, noticed the way he was zoning out. She looked up from her plate, clearly concerned. "You okay, Elon?" she asked gently. "You've seemed a bit off lately." Elon chuckled softly, his usual sarcasm rising to the surface. "What, me? Off? Never." But Sarah wasn't fooled. She leaned in closer, her voice quieter. "You know, it's okay to admit when you're not okay. We're all in this together." For a moment, Elon felt a pang of guilt. Here he was, leading a team that was on the verge of making history, and yet he couldn't even fully engage with them. "I'm just tired, Sarah," Elon confessed, his tone softer now. "It's hard to keep up the facade. All the time, people expect me to be this unstoppable force, but it's not as easy as it looks. Sometimes, I wonder if I've lost who I really am in all of this." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I think you've been running so fast that you forgot to look around at the people who are running alongside you." Elon sat back in his chair, reflecting on her words. It wasn't the first time he'd heard something similar, but for some reason, it felt different this time. Maybe it was because he had started to realize just how much he had neglected the people around him, the people who were just as much a part of his success as his own ambition. "Thanks, Sarah," Elon said, giving her a small smile. "I think you're right. I've been so focused on the next big thing that I've forgotten about the people who are making it happen with me." As the lunch continued, Elon found himself participating more in the conversation. They talked about everything from the future of space to personal hobbies and dreams. For the first time in a long while, Elon didn't feel like he was merely the boss. He felt like part of a team, a group of people all working toward the same shared goal. It was a small thing, but it made all the difference. He could almost feel the weight lifting from his shoulders, just a little bit. Later that evening, as Elon sat in his office, looking over a new set of designs for a Mars habitat, he felt a shift inside himself. It was subtle, but it was there. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone in this journey. He had always known that the work was important, but now he understood that the people around him were just as crucial to the process. Elon sat back in his chair and smiled. The journey wasn't just about him. It never had been. It was about the people, the relationships, and the collective dream they shared. And as he thought about it, he realized that maybe, just maybe, that was what he had been searching for all along. Not just to reach the stars, but to build something meaningful with the people who mattered most. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. And that realization, more than any technological achievement, felt like a victory. The world had its eyes on him, and he would continue to push forward, but this time, he would do it with those who believed in him, not because of his success, but because they shared his vision. They were his true foundation, and with them, he could finally feel the weight of the world becoming a little bit lighter. As the days passed, Elon found himself in an unfamiliar place, slower, more deliberate, more mindful. The intense urgency that had defined so much of his life was beginning to ease, replaced by a renewed focus on his relationships and his sense of self. It wasn't that the pressure of his work had diminished, it hadn't, but he had started to view it differently. Instead of feeling like a weight that threatened to crush him, it now felt like a shared burden, something that was both manageable and meaningful because it was carried by so many others alongside him. Gwyn had noticed the shift in Elon. She wasn't sure exactly what had changed, but it was undeniable. There was a subtle calmness about him, a focus that came not from sheer determination to succeed but from a deeper understanding of the balance between work and life. Elon had become someone who no longer saw himself as a lone force driving the future of humanity. He was now part of something bigger, a team, a family, a shared vision. But just as he began to settle into this new rhythm, another challenge loomed on the horizon. SpaceX's latest Mars mission was encountering a series of unexpected setbacks. Technical issues, environmental factors, and delays in production were beginning to accumulate, threatening the ambitious timeline Elon had set. The pressure was mounting once again, and with it came the old feeling, the need to push harder, work longer, and isolate himself to ensure everything would go according to plan. It was a familiar temptation, one that had nearly consumed him in the past. The urge to return to his old ways, to shut everything out and bury himself in work, was strong. But this time, Elon hesitated. He took a deep breath, remembering the lessons he had recently learned. He didn't have to do it all on his own. He didn't have to bear the weight of the world alone. Instead of diving headfirst into problem-solving mode, Elon decided to approach the situation differently. He reached out to his team, leaned on them for support, and most importantly, he allowed himself to trust them. Gwyn, Steve, Kimball, people who had always been there for him, were there to support him again. They weren't just colleagues or family members, they were his partners in this shared mission. And that made all the difference. The next morning, Elon stood in front of his team at SpaceX headquarters. The air in the room was tense, but there was an underlying current of optimism, too. He had asked for a meeting to address the ongoing issues with the Mars mission, but instead of delivering a speech filled with directives and solutions, he did something unexpected. He opened the floor to his team. "I know things aren't going as smoothly as we hoped," he began, his voice steady but vulnerable. "But we've faced challenges before, and we've overcome them. I want to hear from all of you. What do you think we can do to get this back on track?" For a moment, the room was silent. The engineers, project managers, and scientists all exchanged uncertain glances. They had grown accustomed to Elon's leadership style, direct, decisive, and demanding. But this was different. He wasn't dictating the course of action, he was asking for input. He was showing them that they were just as crucial to the mission as he was. After a brief pause, Gwyn spoke up. "Elon's right. We've hit some bumps, but we've always found a way through. I think it's time to double down on collaboration. We need to really tap into the strengths of each team member, not just to fix the technical issues, but to make sure we're all aligned in the bigger picture." The room began to buzz with ideas, questions, and suggestions. Elon watched as the conversation evolved, with team members offering solutions, voicing concerns, and brainstorming new strategies. It was a far cry from the tense, isolated decision-making sessions he had held in the past. This time, the atmosphere was collaborative, open, and grounded in trust. When the meeting came to an end, Elon felt a sense of relief. He had been worried that the team might see his approach as weak or indecisive, but instead, it had fostered a sense of unity. Everyone had contributed, and together they had come up with a plan to address the challenges ahead. Later that evening, as Elon sat in his office, he reflected on the day's events. There was a quiet sense of pride within him. Not because the Mars mission was back on track, although that was certainly a part of it, but because he had finally learned to lean on others. It wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. Elon picked up his phone and texted Kimball. "I think I finally get it. It's not about carrying the weight alone. It's about sharing it. Thanks for always being there." He didn't expect an immediate response. But within a few minutes, his phone buzzed with a reply. "You've always had that strength in you, Elon. Just needed to remember you don't have to do it alone." Elon smiled and put the phone down, his mind at ease. For the first time in a long time, he felt grounded. He was still Elon Musk, the visionary, the entrepreneur, the one who would lead humanity to Mars. But he was also Elon Musk, the man who had learned to be human again. The next morning, as he walked into the SpaceX headquarters with Gwyn and the rest of his team, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The mission wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone in that room. And the next great leap for mankind would be achieved not through the isolated efforts of one man, but through the collective vision of many. Elon had crossed a threshold, one that had taken him years to reach. He had learned that to be truly great, he didn't have to sacrifice everything that made him human. He just had to allow himself to be a part of something bigger than himself, to trust others, and to remember that even the greatest of dreams are built on relationships, shared effort, and mutual support. And as they stood together in front of the next big challenge, Elon knew that the weight of the world would no longer be something he carried alone. It would be something they carried, together. In the weeks following the meeting at SpaceX, Elon's life seemed to be shifting in ways he hadn't anticipated. The Mars mission, while still filled with technical hurdles, was beginning to find its rhythm. His team was more united, more cohesive than ever before. They weren't just following orders, they were collaborating in ways that felt different, more meaningful. Elon had always been a visionary, but now, he realized, he was starting to see the vision through the eyes of his team. They had their own dreams, their own stakes in the mission. It was no longer just about what he wanted to achieve, it was about what they could achieve together. But despite the growing momentum in his professional life, there was still a part of him that felt unsettled. He had made strides in reconnecting with his team and his family, but the loneliness still lingered. It wasn't something he could shake off entirely, especially when the weight of the world seemed to hang over him constantly. Despite the progress, there was a deeper sense of insecurity that still clawed at him. It was late one evening when Elon found himself in a rare quiet moment, sitting at the edge of his bed in his apartment. He had just finished a long day of meetings and was, for once, not thinking about rockets or timelines. He was thinking about himself, about the man he had become. He couldn't help but think back to his younger self, the idealistic young entrepreneur who had dreamed of changing the world. The boy who had believed that success would bring him everything he needed. And now, as he sat there, he wondered if the price of that success had been too high. He thought about his childhood in South Africa, the isolation he had often felt, and how he had buried himself in his work as a way to escape the feelings of alienation. The loneliness had never fully gone away, it had only grown more pronounced as his life had become more public. People admired him for his genius, but they didn't really know him. Was this what he had sacrificed? Was this the cost of achieving greatness? The question haunted him for a long time. The next day, Elon had a conversation with Kimball that would change his perspective yet again. They had arranged to meet at a cafe in Los Angeles, a place far removed from the demands of SpaceX and Tesla. It was a chance for Elon to step away from the relentless pace of his work and reconnect with the person who had always been there for him. "Hey, big brother," Kimball greeted him with a warm smile as Elon sat down across from him. He was holding a coffee cup, clearly relaxed, his eyes twinkling with the same mischievous energy Elon had always admired. "How's everything going? You seem a little off." Elon smiled weakly, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, I guess I am. It's been a crazy few weeks with the Mars mission and all the new challenges. I've been thinking a lot about things lately, about the sacrifices I've made, and whether it's all worth it." Kimball raised an eyebrow. "You've been thinking about your own happiness?" "Yeah," Elon said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've been so focused on changing the world that I never really stopped to think about what I need. What I want. I've neglected the things that make life worth living, friends, family, connections. And I feel it. The loneliness is still there, you know." Kimball nodded, his expression softening. "Elon, you've always had a bigger vision than anyone else. You're doing things that no one else could even dream of. But don't forget that it's okay to need people. You don't have to do it all alone. And I'm here, man. I'm always here." Elon looked at his brother, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. Kimball had always been the one who could see through the noise and get straight to what mattered. He wasn't interested in Elon's success or wealth, he was interested in Elon the person. "I think I've been running away from something," Elon said softly. "Not just loneliness, but the idea that I'm not enough without all the things I've built. Without the rockets, the cars, the companies. But maybe it's time to stop trying to prove myself." Kimball smiled knowingly. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Elon. Especially not to yourself. You've already done more than most people could ever dream of. But if you want to find peace, you've got to let go of the idea that you're not enough just as you are. Elon took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his brother's words. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the heavy armor he built around himself was beginning to crack. Maybe Kimball was right. Maybe he didn't need to keep proving his worth to the world. Maybe he just needed to be himself. The conversation with Kimball was a turning point for Elon. Over the following weeks, he made a conscious effort to slow down, to spend more time with his family and friends, and to allow himself to experience life beyond the relentless drive to succeed. He began to meditate more, taking moments to clear his mind and connect with the present. He also started to spend more time outdoors, going for walks, and even participating in activities that had once seemed trivial, playing video games with Kimball, taking his kids to the park, or even just reading books for pleasure. These small, seemingly insignificant actions began to shift something within him. He realized that life wasn't just about building the future, it was about experiencing the present. And in that present, there was room for connection, for love, for joy. It wasn't an either/or situation, it was a matter of balance. Elon also reached out to old friends, rekindling relationships that had faded into the background during his years of focus on his businesses. Some of these friendships had been strained, but many had remained strong. These moments of reconnection were humbling. They reminded him that he wasn't alone, that he had people who cared about him for who he was, not just for his accomplishments. And perhaps most importantly, Elon began to embrace the idea of vulnerability. It wasn't easy, and it didn't come naturally to him, but he started to allow himself to be open about his struggles. He let down his guard, even with his team at SpaceX, and shared his feelings of doubt and insecurity. The response was overwhelming. His team wasn't just there to follow orders, they were there to support him, to lift him up when he needed it most. One evening, as Elon sat in his office at SpaceX, reflecting on the journey he had been on, he looked out the window at the stars above. He thought about the mission to Mars, the rockets, the cars, the innovations. But most of all, he thought about the people, the relationships he had nurtured and those he was still building. Elon had always believed that the future would be shaped by technology and innovation. But now, he understood that the true key to success lay in the connections we make with others. The bonds we form, the love we share, and the support we give each other, these were the things that truly powered humanity forward. The loneliness that had once consumed him no longer had a hold on him. He had found a sense of clarity that he hadn't realized he needed. Life wasn't just about reaching for the stars. It was about living fully, with others by your side. And as he looked up at the stars, he knew that the future, his future, was in the hands of those he loved and trusted. Together, they would reach for the stars. Elon's perspective had changed drastically over the past several months. The weight of loneliness had begun to lift, replaced with a newfound clarity and understanding of the importance of connections, both in his personal life and in his work. The intensity that had defined him for so long had softened, but the fire that drove him forward was still very much alive. He wasn't abandoning his dreams of changing the world, he was simply learning how to pursue those dreams with a more balanced heart. The team at SpaceX was thriving under this new approach. Collaboration had become the cornerstone of their success, and Elon's decision to open up to his team had resulted in unprecedented innovation. Ideas flowed freely, and the collective drive to push the boundaries of space exploration had reached a level of energy Elon had never seen before. It was as if they were all working towards something larger than themselves, each person playing a crucial role in the journey to Mars, a journey that now felt more attainable than ever. Elon found himself attending more meetings with a sense of ease, not because the work was easier, but because he no longer felt the need to bear the weight of the mission on his shoulders alone. He had learned to trust his team, and in doing so, he had earned their trust in return. It was a new kind of leadership, one built on mutual respect and shared responsibility. But while SpaceX was soaring, something unexpected happened that would force Elon to confront the true depth of his personal transformation. One evening, he received a call that would change everything. It was from his mother, Musk, who had been one of the few constants in Elon's life. She sounded distressed. "Elon, we need to talk." May's voice was calm but tinged with worry. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Elon's heart skipped a beat as he stood up from his desk. He could hear the tremor in her voice, and it sent a wave of concern through him. "I've been diagnosed with a condition," May continued, her words slow but steady. "It's not something life-threatening, but it will require treatment, and it will take time. I wanted you to know because, well, I don't want you to feel like you're not part of this." Elon's world seemed to slow down. His mother, who had always been the picture of health and vitality, now needed his support. The thought of her facing a health challenge struck him deeply, and for the first time in years, he was forced to confront the fragility of life, not just in the abstract sense, but in the very real sense that the people he loved were vulnerable. "I'm coming home," Elon said quickly, already reaching for his keys. "We'll figure this out together." The next morning, Elon found himself on a plane to South Africa, his mind heavy with thoughts of his mother's diagnosis. As much as he had shifted in his thinking about work and relationships, this moment was a reminder that no matter how successful he became, family was what anchored him. And it was time to be there for his mother in a way he never had before. When Elon arrived in South Africa, he found his mother at her home, sitting in a cozy living room that had always reminded him of his childhood. May smiled when she saw him, but her smile couldn't hide the fatigue in her eyes. "Elon, I'm so glad you're here," she said, reaching out to embrace him. "I know you've been busy with everything, but I wanted to make sure you understood what was happening before it became overwhelming." Elon nodded, sitting down beside her. He had always admired his mother's strength, her ability to handle anything life threw at her. But now, seeing her vulnerable in this way, he realized just how much he had taken for granted. He had spent so many years focused on his work that he hadn't given her the time and attention she deserved. "Mom, you've always been there for me," he said softly. "Now it's my turn." For the next few days, Elon helped his mother with her treatment and spent time with her in a way he hadn't in years. They talked about everything, the old days, their family history, and Elon's journey to becoming who he was. He shared his struggles, the loneliness he had battled, and his newfound approach to life. In return, May shared her own reflections on aging and the importance of embracing change. "You're learning the things I never took the time to learn," May told him one evening as they sat together on the porch. "The truth is, it's easy to get lost in the chase for success. But it's not the things we build that matter in the end, it's the people we build our lives with." Elon listened carefully, struck by the weight of her words. His mother had always been a source of wisdom, but hearing her speak so openly about life's inevitable changes and the importance of relationships gave him a new perspective. He had always admired her resilience, but now, he was learning something deeper about how to live fully, not just in pursuit of dreams, but in embracing the richness of human connection. As the weeks passed, Elon spent more time in South Africa, not just supporting his mother but reconnecting with parts of himself he had long neglected. He spent time with old friends, visiting the places that had shaped his childhood. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known he was missing. During one of his visits to an old cafe in Pretoria, he ran into an old mentor, a professor from his university days. They spent hours reminiscing about the past, but more importantly, they talked about the future, not just the big picture of space and technology, but the future of humanity, of relationships, and the way forward in a world that was always changing. "You know, Elon," the professor said thoughtfully, "you've always been so focused on what's out there, beyond Earth. But maybe the most important journey is the one we take inward. The one where we learn to live with ourselves and the people around us." Those words resonated deeply with Elon. For so long, he had defined his life by the work he did and the legacy he would leave behind. But now, he was beginning to see that his journey wasn't just about reaching Mars or inventing the next big thing. It was about how he lived the life he had, how he nurtured his relationships, and how he faced the inevitable challenges of growing older with grace and humility. When Elon returned to the United States, he carried with him a new understanding of what it meant to be whole. He still had the drive, the passion, and the vision to change the world, but now, he knew that to truly change the world, he had to be fully present in it. And that meant embracing the people who mattered most, nurturing his relationships, and giving himself the space to grow, not just professionally, but personally. As he sat down at his desk in the SpaceX headquarters, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The work ahead was challenging, yes, but it was no longer something to be done alone. His team, his family, his friends, together, they would take the next step forward. Together, they would build something that truly mattered. And maybe, just maybe, in the end, it wouldn't be the rockets that defined his legacy. It would be the connections he made along the way, the relationships he built with those he loved, and the way he chose to live his life. Elon Musk was no longer just a visionary, he was a man who had learned the greatest lesson of all, the true power of human connection. As Elon's world began to realign with his newfound understanding of life, a new challenge emerged. It wasn't the usual challenges he faced, rockets failing, deadlines slipping, or the immense pressure of trying to colonize Mars. This time, it was something much more personal. Despite the clarity he had gained, Elon found himself staring into the abyss of aging, grappling with the idea that his time to achieve all his ambitious dreams was running out. It wasn't just the simple act of getting older. It was the awareness that, no matter how much progress he made in space exploration or in technology, he couldn't stop the clock. Time was relentless. His own sense of mortality seemed to creep into his thoughts with every passing day. He was approaching his 50s now, and while he'd always prided himself on his youthfulness and energy, there were days when he felt the weight of age creeping in. Despite his accomplishments, there was a gnawing sense of insecurity he couldn't shake. It was as if, with each passing year, the idea of being truly fulfilled slipped further from his reach. Sitting in his office late one evening, Elon stared out at the city lights, wondering how much longer he could keep pushing at this breakneck speed. He had come so far, Mars was within reach, Tesla was changing the world, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something deeply personal. It wasn't until an unexpected conversation with one of his closest friends, Steve, that things began to make sense. "Hey, man," Steve's voice was calm on the other end of the phone. "You've been quiet lately. Everything all right?" Elon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Steve. I've been feeling like time's catching up to me. I know it's crazy, I've built all these amazing things, I'm doing what I've always dreamed of. But for some reason, I can't shake this feeling that it's all slipping away." There was a pause on the line, and Elon could almost hear Steve thinking. "It's not crazy, Elon. You're just human. But here's the thing, man. You've spent so much of your life focused on things that go up and out, that it's easy to forget the things that ground you. Time moves quickly. But people, relationships, those are the things that last. You can have all the rockets in the world, but when you're old and alone, what's it all really worth?" Elon's chest tightened as he absorbed Steve's words. There it was again, the idea that, at the end of the day, the things that really mattered weren't the milestones, the companies, or the planets they could reach. It was the connections, the bonds, the love they cultivated along the way. Steve continued, "You've spent years getting the world's attention. Now, maybe it's time to turn that focus inward. Spend time with the people who love you. Let them in. Let yourself be loved, too." Elon sat quietly, contemplating. The silence on the line felt like the answer he had been searching for all along. He had been so focused on building a future, reaching Mars, changing the course of humanity, that he had neglected the very things that made life worth living. The people who had been there for him, who had supported him, and who had shown him love, were often pushed aside in the rush of ambition. That night, for the first time in years, Elon allowed himself to relax. Instead of diving into work the minute he woke up, he spent time with his family. He made a conscious decision to show up for his children more, to be present with them in the moments that really mattered. He took long walks with Kimball, having conversations about life and the lessons they had both learned through the years. Elon even made it a point to call his old friends, those from before his meteoric rise. The friends who knew him before he was Elon Musk, the billionaire and space tycoon. And as he did, something remarkable began to happen. His sense of insecurity started to dissipate. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't obsessing over the future. He wasn't preoccupied with the need to achieve more, faster, bigger. Instead, he focused on what was right in front of him. The people in his life. The relationships he had neglected. One evening, as he sat at the dinner table with his children, talking about their day, he realized that this was the first time in a long while that he had truly felt at peace. His mind wasn't racing with the problems of Mars or the pressure of the next big breakthrough. He was simply enjoying the present. He could hear his children laughing, telling stories, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like the future didn't matter as much as the here and now. It was in these moments that Elon came to a deep realization. The loneliness that had once gripped him wasn't just about not having friends or a partner, it was about the fact that he had spent so much time trying to control the future that he had forgotten how to live in the present. He had sacrificed his personal happiness for professional achievement, and while the rewards of his work were undeniable, he was learning that they didn't fill the emptiness in the same way human connection did. Elon's journey had been long and fraught with moments of doubt, pain, and isolation, but he was beginning to see it differently. He wasn't the solitary figure he had always thought himself to be. He was part of something much larger, something that wasn't defined by success, wealth, or space exploration. It was defined by the love and support he received from those who truly mattered. And in that moment, he felt truly secure. His return to work in the following weeks felt different. It wasn't that his focus on space and technology had waned, it was that he now approached it with a greater sense of balance. He understood the importance of his mission, but he no longer felt the pressure to do everything alone. He had built a team that believed in his vision, and now, he saw it was just as important to let them help carry the weight. Elon's interactions with his team began to shift. Instead of leading with a singular, unyielding focus on success, he led with a new sense of humility and connection. He encouraged them to challenge him, to share their own dreams and ideas. He started asking them how they were doing, not just in terms of work, but in terms of life. The result was nothing short of transformative. The culture at SpaceX grew even stronger. The team, once a group of highly skilled engineers and innovators, became a family, united not just by their work, but by the sense of shared purpose and mutual respect. Months passed, and with every passing day, Elon felt a renewed sense of confidence, not in the things he had accomplished, but in the people he had around him. In the relationships he had built. And as he looked toward the future, toward the Mars mission, the technological advancements, and the incredible feats they would undoubtedly achieve, he knew that success would no longer be measured in milestones or accolades. The true measure of his life would be found in the people he loved and who loved him in return. And in that, Elon Musk finally found the peace he had been searching for all along. The rocket ships would still launch. The cars would still revolutionize transportation. But for Elon, the journey ahead was no longer just about reaching Mars. It was about reaching the people who had helped him along the way, and ensuring that, no matter where his dreams took him, he would never be alone again. In the end, Elon had discovered the ultimate truth: greatness wasn't defined by what you achieve alone, but by the people you bring with you on the journey. And that, he realized, was the true legacy he would leave behind. As Elon Musk continued to move forward in his journey, he realized that the greatest legacy he could leave behind wasn't just a collection of rockets soaring into space or electric cars taking over the world. No, it was the shift in how he lived his life, how he led his teams, and the relationships he nurtured along the way. It was the understanding that in his quest to change the world, he had to change himself first. In the months that followed his personal transformation, SpaceX reached new heights. The Mars mission, which had once seemed like a distant dream, was now on the verge of becoming a reality. The team had built the first prototypes of the spacecraft designed to transport humans to the Red Planet. Yet, for all the excitement and achievement surrounding the project, Elon found himself measuring success in ways he never had before. It wasn't the groundbreaking technology, the first successful launch to Mars, or the completion of a new solar power initiative that made him feel truly accomplished. No, it was the growth he had experienced within himself, the shift from a man who had once believed that work and achievement were all-consuming, to a man who now valued connection, love, and presence above all else. One evening, as he sat on the balcony of his home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Elon reflected on how far he had come. He had always been driven by an insatiable desire to conquer the impossible, to reach the stars, but now he understood something far deeper. The impossible wasn't just about reaching new frontiers in space. It was about breaking the barriers within himself and truly embracing the people around him. His children, who had once seemed like distant figures in his life, were now a constant source of joy. He spent weekends with them, showing up for their milestones, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. His bond with Kimball had deepened as well, and the two brothers found themselves collaborating on more than just business ventures. They were learning to be present for each other as family, in ways they hadn't been before. Elon's relationship with his mother, May, was also something that filled him with gratitude. He had been there for her through her health challenges, and the time they spent together had solidified a bond he had never fully appreciated. The conversations they shared weren't just about the past or her treatment, they were about life, philosophy, and the lessons they had both learned over the years. Even within the halls of SpaceX, the culture had shifted. The innovation that had always been present now felt even more profound. Elon no longer felt the need to control everything. Instead, he had created a culture of collaboration and mutual respect. It wasn't just about pushing the boundaries of technology, it was about pushing the boundaries of what it meant to work as a team, to support each other, and to build something together. One of the most poignant moments came when the SpaceX team successfully launched the first manned mission to the International Space Station using the Starship rocket. Elon was there, of course, overseeing every detail. But as he watched the rocket ascend into the sky, he wasn't just thinking about the technology or the achievement. He was thinking about the people who had worked tirelessly to make this moment a reality, the engineers, the designers, the technicians, and all the people who had been part of the journey. They had shared in the dream, and together, they had made it come true. "I never could have done this alone," he said during the celebration that followed. "This wasn't just about the technology. It was about all of you. You believed in this vision, and you believed in each other. That's the real success." In the years that followed, Elon Musk continued to guide SpaceX, Tesla, and other ventures with a renewed sense of purpose. But it wasn't the relentless pursuit of innovation that defined his leadership, it was the way he nurtured the people who surrounded him. He learned that no matter how much success one achieves, the true test of a legacy lies in how we treat others, how we build relationships, and how we lift each other up. As Elon looked ahead to the future, he found himself at peace. His dreams of reaching Mars were still intact, but he had come to realize that the most important part of any journey wasn't the destination, it was the people you traveled with. It was the connections you made along the way, and the impact you had on the lives of those who shared in your mission. And so, as the world looked to the stars, Elon Musk looked inward, knowing that the true power of his legacy would not lie in the rockets he launched or the planets he reached, but in the lives he touched, the relationships he built, and the love he had finally allowed himself to receive. For in the end, Elon realized that the key to conquering the impossible wasn't about technology, wealth, or fame. It was about the people who walked with you, who believed in you, and who made you a better person along the way. As the years went on, Elon continued to lead with a quiet confidence. The headlines about his ventures were still full of groundbreaking achievements, but the man behind them had become something different. He was not just a visionary or a billionaire. He was a father, a brother, a son, and a friend, a man who had learned that true greatness lay not in changing the world alone, but in changing it together. And as the sun set on yet another day, Elon Musk stood at the edge of his vision, knowing that no matter what the future held, he had already achieved the greatest victory of all. He had built a life worth living, and that, in itself, was the greatest success. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?